Tugboats are very cool. Unfortunately, I don't have enough water to utilize one of them. That being said, I have a lot of dirt to drive around on and a lot of things to tug around. So I built this TugBuggy to do just that. Made it out of portside laying around, including a Nissan 1986 D21 pickup truck that I was porting out. I have some lawnmower parts in here. I have a pressure washer engine and a whole bunch of scrap metal. After parting out what I could from the Nissan truck, I got to work on attaching the frame, or what was left of it, to the axle. Pretty ugly weld right there, but Alright, finally starting to hit my stride here at the top. Looking a little bit better. Still not quite right, but better than that. That's for sure. I didn't really have a plan on how to make it all work. I just knew what I had in my scrap pile and what I was hoping to accomplish with it. I'm going to measure out some bits of the same plate to form a triangle that connects here on the long side, here on the short side. Well, I guess next I'll put the front diff back in, and now we've got the frame, the wheels, we've got the front differential installed, and the rear one already installed too. With that, I need to start figuring out how to connect the two differentials together and have some way to put power to that connection. This tiny little drive shaft I'm going to have here. Ridiculous. That's really funny. Okay, well that looks about right. Let's do it. Now obviously this isn't perfectly centered and it's also definitely not balanced, but because it's so short and because this vehicle will never see any sort of significant speed, I think it should be completely fine. Alright, now let's see how well, if at all, that fits onto here. Tightening down those bolts, it should press itself in nice. Earlier I was contemplating using some old CV axles I had laying around in my scrap pile to make these because I thought the angles would be worse, but I'm glad I opted for the U-joints because that was really easy. Now that I have one drive shaft in, I know what the limit of the position of the rear end of the transfer case is now. And with that, I can reorient this, maybe even make the front drive shaft. So I've made another drive shaft. This one's even smaller. This is for the front. It's just kind of made out of various U-joints I had laying around. I really didn't want to buy any new ones, so I dug through my scrap pile and found enough that would fit onto there. Had to cut them pretty close to the ears in a few spots, but I think it should work. Even if it doesn't, this was a fun thing to try and do. So this side was from a 4Runner. The bolts didn't quite line up, but they were really close, so I just bored them out with a 1/2-inch drill bit, and that got them to bolt on just fine. As for the rear end, I need to connect that to the flange on the transfer case. So, to aid with that, I took the flange off the front of the transfer case. I was concerned at first because I thought maybe it would have some sort of preload on it I would have to worry about, but luckily that doesn't seem to be the case. So I was able to take it off. I'm going to trace this out onto some 1/2-inch plate that I have laying around and see if we can fab something up that I can weld onto. I've been trying to really minimize the amount of money I'm spending on this thing. Just trying to use up some stuff from my scrap pile to build this stock that I bought and ported out. So one guy had it and he used it as a wood toy for a long time. And then he completely shredded the transmission. Let it sit for a while and then sold it to someone who bought it with the hopes of fixing it up and restoring it. They took it apart a little bit further, sat even longer in their driveway, and then another guy bought it. They just sat in his yard for a long time, and then finally I bought it off of that, and then finally after all that time I just parted it out, sold where I could, made a little bit of money off of it, and kept the parts I wanted to mess around with. Kind of funny how that goes. Pick something up, hoping to work on it, and then keep pushing it off for later, and one day you realize later just means never. These scissors are absolutely cooked. Oh yeah, I also use these scissors to cut sandpaper, so that probably dulls them out pretty quick too. I was helping my buddy straighten out the frame on his van, and all that went well. His wheel came off. His entire hub cracked. Everything was just falling apart on the front end, and we needed to move his van out of the way of the road and back into the parking lot where we had been working. I just kind of strapped some wood in the front corner of his vehicle so he could just slide the nose as he drove with the rear wheels, and that worked great, but that did tear apart the rope section of that ratchet strap. That's not a big deal because I had this one laying around from pretty much the same thing happened. So because I had held on to it, now I once again have a functional ratchet strap set. Now, look at that. The transfer case is on there. I'm going to try this weld at 240. Now we're at the point where we can start figuring out how to get power to this transfer case. So I was thinking about this the other night. What we've got going on here is the input spline is 1 3/4 inches wide The inside is about 1 inch and it's got 24 splines on there. I looked around briefly online. I could get a giant sprocket or something, or some shafts and make something work, but all that would cost money. And another option would be this differential. This is from a riding lawnmower. What I want to do today is I'm going to clean this up a little bit, crack it open, see what's going on in the inside, and see if I can make it work. It might work, it might not. It just depends on what's being oiled in there and how. I might just be able to flip it and call it good, or maybe I'll have to drill some holes and set up some sort of oil pump or something. I'm not sure. We'll just have to see. Or maybe it just might not work at all. Alright, so I've cleaned off both of the halves, and I also already went on ahead and chopped it. You can see that one side is significantly shorter now. You can tell which side is the original and which side is the cut, because this one still has that collar that the axles sit in. This side I just chopped it pretty close. What I want to do next before I start welding differential is I need to cut this axle. So I'm going to place it in there, line it up, and then I'm going to cut it here for now. Then we'll start reassembling it into the shortened housing, and then once it looks like it's all lined up correctly, I'll weld it in. There's got to be a tool or something I can make or perhaps purchase. So that kind of like a caulk gun, you know, but for these tubes. If you know something like that, I mean, definitely let me know. Alright, so yes, last night I measured out the transmission, or this transaxle, I guess, inside the transfer case, and I marked off how much I had to cut off. So here we go. I about half the length of this shaft here, a little bit extra, and when I cut it off, that meant I removed the entire key weight section. So I'm still going to need a key. I just use my cutoff wheel to kind of rough one in, and that should work fine. I've done something similar before. I'll leave it as it is right there for now, and then once I get the actual keyway adapter in the mail, then I can test fit it and adjust the cut as needed. Alright, so we've got the adapter that we're going to plug into there, and we've got a piece of that shaft that I cut off from the side of the transaxle that I wasn't going to be using. So I want this to get welded up right there, and it butts in nicely, sits there pretty good, but there is some room for me to wiggle it. Putting this shaft into the adapter, and inside there's some teeth. If I wrap some masking tape around here, I should be able to find a nice thickness that makes it sit there pretty straight and flush. So I think it was about 14 or so wraps of the tape. I've got a nice little knob on the end. You can see where the teeth are biting into it, and that fits in decently snugly. I've got it tacked on. Let's see how straight it looks. That actually looks pretty darn straight. Wow, look at that. And yes, this is just going to leave that masking tape on the inside, but I don't think that'll cause any trouble. Alright, now check this out. I got the shaft in, I got my transaxle stuck into there now, It's currently not full of fluid, but this is the orientation I want it in. Went on this way here. So, if I hold the gas pedal and start turning this, look at that. It's going to take like 176 rotations of this pulley to equal 1 rotation of the wheels. More than that. That's what we're looking for. There we go. It's a little taller than I was picturing it. That's where I sat on the seats. I really tried it out, and this is definitely too tall. I think this is just still too tall. I lowered the seats a bit, but it's still too high. I think it's just a bit ridiculous, the height. Alright, so this is what I've come up with. I pretty much just took the entire seat off of that bracket. I removed said bracket, it's over there now. And then I just welded it straight to this crossmember I already had in here. I think that's a good spot for the motor. I made this tension-based clutch system, kind of like what a riding mower would use, but I ended up leaving this idea behind later on. It didn't really quite work right ever. I ended up switching over to a CVT belt, like the torque converter that a go-kart would use. I just bought it online for like $100, and that worked way better. Alright, now I do want to point out I don't have any controls on this yet, so no steering, no brakes. I don't even have pedals for the accelerator or anything like that. I'm just going to be using a metal stick to poke things. So I'll be wearing my safety glasses. Some parts already did fly off. Part of the cooling fan on the transaxle just flew away on me. It worked! Alright, so now that we've established this thing can move forward, at least on its own, I want to be able to steer it as well. So I still have the original steering box that came with the truck. What I am planning on doing to lift this input from down here, somewhere around here where I'll be able to reach it with a steering wheel, is a bicycle. I went on our favorite online marketplace for used items, found a guy trying to get rid of an old bicycle for really cheap. He had already had the ad up for a few weeks at this point, so I offered him an even lower price. He said yes. So here's the remains of the bike after I chopped it up, and here's the part that I am using primarily. I want to have that big gear that would usually go to the pedals input over to the steering box, like that, somewhere around here. Since I'm not having power steering, it'll be nice to have a small gear up there and a big gear down there. That'll make it a little bit easier to steer the whole thing. Alright, so this is what I've got so far for the steering solution. I got this piece of scrap metal. It's real thick. It's from the trailer hitches that I took apart for a different project. I've still got all this plate laying around with a little bit of this chunk on it. So I drilled a hole in it just big enough for that threaded rod to fit through. So I'm going to have to weld a piece of pipe onto here to extend this, and then that's where the steering wheel will sit. But now that I've got some nice flat sections here, what I can do, weld it up something like this. Well, that was a beautiful weld, but I welded it onto the wrong side. So now we get to try again. Spots I had to cut. Whoo, that's hot. All right. Alright, so this is going to be the steering gear setup. What I need to do is connect the steering wheel to this side and the actual steering gear to that side. To do that, I'm going to utilize this rag joint that came from the original steering shaft of that truck, and I want to weld it on right there. It's almost the right fit, but there's still a bit of wiggle room. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to prep both of these surfaces for welding, and then I'll probably just do the masking tape trick again to get this thing to sit on there. Oh yeah, there we go. Let's do a little demonstration of it. Oh yeah, look at that. Looking good. I connected part of the steering shaft, the original steering shaft, onto the new one there. I just found some sprocket in my scrap pile that fit nicely onto there. Welded it on, and then I cut up the original steering column, the end of it that goes onto the steering wheel, and welded it onto there as well. Now I'll be able to put on the steering wheel and then do some test fitment on the actual vehicle and see where I want to mount this whole assembly. I have made a steering rack. I used that bicycle frame. There's the small sprocket for the input and the big sprocket down there. Steering gear. The original rod that came out of the steering gear is now connected with some pipe from the steering column. That extends it out to this rag joint, then joins into this big sprocket down there. I made some brackets to hold the whole thing up. I need to do a little bit more. The gear reduction is nice. It's actually quite easy. It takes a lot of steering to turn it, but I mean, it's very little effort to do so, which is nice. There you go. Alright, so these two things are from the fair lead of a winch. I'm going to use these as the pivot points for the pedals I'm going to make. I need to make some pedals to control this thing now, because I've got seats in place, I've got my clutch lever, I've got my steering already, I still need the tensioner. But at this point, the next thing I want to work on for this is the pedals, so that whenever I'm driving it, I don't have to use a weird stick or whatever other methods you've seen me use so far. So what I'm thinking is, right there where the lever on the torque converter is, that thing goes both up and down to tell it to start outputting in one direction or the other. So to make it go reverse, you pull it one way. To make it go forward, you pull it the other way. I'm going to extend some tabs out on the end of that lever arm, and then I'm going to use these cables I've got here. They're like the throttle cables or parking brakes, things like that. I've just got a few of these laying around. So I'm going to use those and then transfer that force from there up to some pedals that are living right here. And to handle forward and reverse, I'm just going to have two separate pedals, one for going forward and one for going backwards. I started trying to piece together how I wanted to make the footrest here that's going to have the pedals and act as a way to help you climb up. And then I realized that I need to set up the pedals first, because I want the pedals like this. Alright, I got a little carried away there off camera, but here's the pedals you saw me make. I've mounted them up onto a piece of squarish tube and then that to another one, and I'm going to mount that right there. And then if that all looks good, then alright, let's talk about how I'm going to control those pedals there. So I've got these two throttle cable things. Pretty sure I bought this one for my truck. So I think this is the cruise control throttle cable, and this might be the original one. I went on ahead and drilled some holes in the ends there. What I'm going to do is those ends that have the holes drilled in them are going to be bolted up to those wings of that plate I just welded onto there. But yeah, that's the plan here. Alright, so here I've got those two throttle cables, cut a little bit of C-channel out to mount them on, and now I'm starting to build out the bracket that's going to hold this entire assembly. If it doesn't work, then I'll make something else. Let's go ahead and pop this thing out so we don't have to overheat and melt it. Now, welding this thing this hard, obviously overkill, but I need more practice with it. That is not the correct orientation for that. Yeah, that looks great. Alright, so I got that thing I just made, I just have it tacked on. The placement is perfect, it's exactly what I'm looking for. So, I'm gonna connect the ends of the cables to the pedals, and then after confirming that that's all good, then I can do the finish welding on that part. I'm going to drill some holes so that these guys can pass through underneath. Then once they're through, I can figure out where I want to attach little tabs to connect the cables to the pedals, and that'll be that. I have a tendency to just start mashing the trigger, burn out your drill bits. Yeah, that fits. I held my hand near the torque converter after the last ride and it was very hot. This is what the fan looks like right now, so I figured I should replace it. Don't have this nut anymore. I must have removed, I do remember removing it and putting it somewhere and saying to myself, I'll remember where I put this. But it looks like that didn't happen. I keep having to hop onto the front axle to put more weight onto there, so I grabbed some flywheels I had laying around in my scrap pile. That should help a little bit. That reminds me, I need to find that nut. But I adjusted how the go pedal works a little bit, and I changed entirely how, well, I guess I attached the reverse pedal finally. I used the similar method I used here, where I just took a little nut, I cut a slot into it and flattened one of the sides and then just welded it onto the foot pedal. So now both pedals work. Let's see, I did the tensioner, and last time I was driving, this started unscrewing. That's the output from the steering system over into the steering box. That needs to stay attached. So what I ended up doing is I just punched a hole through there with my plasma cutter until I saw the threaded rod at the core of this, and then I just filled that up with weld, and I did that on two sides, and that should be good. What else did I do? Oh, and then the neutral lever is right there now. I used that polyurethane bushing I was talking about and an old socket wrench. So that should be drive, I believe, and then this is neutral. That'll be useful. The biggest issue I'm still facing is the belt drive and the clutch assembly. That just does not seem to be working well at all. Didn't think about that. Alright, I ended up doing some more work off camera, but this is what we've got going on now. So here's the motor. I took the gas tank off so I could get some clearance while I figured out this thing. This is a CVT style torque converter meant for like a mini bike or a go-kart. I'm going to use that to transfer power from the engine to the transmission. I took this pulley that was the original drive pulley of the transmission. I cut the center of it out. Now we just have this little guy, and I want to keep this because this big hex here is what interfaces with the cooling fan, and there's like 41 splines inside there that actually mate onto the shaft. Now, next thing I want to do is I'm going to connect this sprocket onto here, but I want to make sure I weld it on correctly, and I also need to take off this flange right there. To help me cut it, cheap little plastic shape I printed out. This goes into here, and then this way I'll be able to stick this into my bandsaw and cut it very straight. Got some zip to it now. Whew, it's hot. So quick little tour of the sheet metal work I've been doing. I covered up the fronts there so you can't stick your foot into the fan blade or into the chain or anything like that. I redid the neutral switch now works like this. It was way overcomplicated before. I did this big sheet up top, which was one of the most important ones, so that you don't just drop things down into the engine bay. Little piece of plate right there. I used some grommets there to guide the fuel lines through. I relocated the gas tank with new lines. I got this separate container to hold the gear oil for the transmission, and that lives up here now. Oh yeah, I reinforced the seats a little bit. I put some metal up here that holds the seats from the bottom so that when you sit down they don't just kind of lever that way. And then just now I put this thing up. This is some scrap shelf pad laying around. I wanted to cover this side up so no limbs or anything get into there and touch the fan or the chain, but I also needed to have airflow here, so I just chopped up some shelf pad laying around, and I actually really like how that turned out. I think that looks pretty sick. Next, I'll either get to work on the bed, which is very important because I need a bed on there so this thing can be useful, and also so that I have more weight over the front, because I'm still running into issues where I have to ghost ride the thing and kind of walk over to the axle and put some weight on one of the wheels so I get traction again. And while that is kind of fun, that kind of defeats the purpose of this thing, so I need weight on the front. check this out. This is the brake master cylinder from that 4Runner that I ported out, along with a mounting bracket that I made for it. Pretty nice and beefy, and this will let me mount it onto the buggy and use this as the hydraulic brake system. I got this mounting plate off of the brake booster that came with this master cylinder off that 4Runner. I just chopped it up to take out this part. So I now have hydraulic brakes. I plumbed the lines. This one goes over to the front axle, and then this one gets split to the rear axle, but I only have this side currently hooked up. And that's because I cannot find the caliper mounting bracket for the other side. I still have the actual caliper itself, but I may have scrapped the mounting bracket. I think it might be gone. I found a banjo bolt in my spare parts bucket, and then I just welded the holes. Just put a little tack in there and then plugged it in. That seems to be holding. I bled the brakes and it all works now. To actually actuate the master cylinder, what I'm doing is this big steel bar right here. This is part of that differential from the riding mower that's currently inside here. When I chopped off one of the legs, I kept them. So I've got it mounted up onto this bolt right here on the parking brake. So when I pull this up, it moves it back that way. This little set of ears right here, this mounting section, that is from the brake assembly of the 4Runner. I just took that part out because I wanted to reuse it. And then this little shaft right here is just a bolt I had laying around that was the right thickness to go inside the master cylinder piston there, and the right thread pitch to interface with this. And this gives me a little bit of adjustment range. And I need this joint right there because when I pull this up, when I pull up on that, you see how what used to be the axle shaft kind of moves upwards? I needed to have some way to translate this motion into horizontal motion. So that's what that does. So now I have a locking hydraulic brake.